Hi everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Risk with Dr. Naveen Agarwal, where each week we talk about a topic related to risk management of medical devices. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, principal and founder at Achieve, where my personal mission is to help you achieve success in risk management. In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Adam Saltman to talk about how best to bring the voice of the patient in the medical device product development and post-market. He's the best person to discuss this topic because not only is he a medical doctor with experience in surgery, but he has also worked at the US FDA. So he has deep understanding of the patient perspective as well as that of regulatory authorities. We had this conversation in front of a live audience as part of a LinkedIn live audio event. You're about to hear a recording of our conversation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I'm so excited to welcome Adam. Hello, Adam. Welcome to our conversation again. I'm so excited that you are able to join today.
Well, thanks for asking me on, Naveen. It's a terrific honor and a compliment, and I'm glad to be here.
Awesome, Adam. So why don't we get started with just a little bit of introduction from you. You have had such a distinguished career. And if you could share maybe a few key pivotal moments in your career that shaped your career decisions for all of us to learn from, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for asking. I think, someone once said to me that I've kind of had three careers, I guess. That's one way to look at it. I mean, I started out as a clinician. I practiced heart surgery for about 20 years. And that was a very, very good way to gain an exposure and an experience with risk, because every decision you make and every decision that a patient makes is based really on a benefit risk assessment. And, what procedure are they going to undergo, and is it worth it, and is it the right thing to do? And I can certainly, give you some anecdotes about that if people are interested. But I then went into regulation, as you pointed out. I worked for the FDA, and I got very involved there with the post-market benefit risk decision-making process that the FDA had come out with in 2016 on their benefit risk guidance, and really dug deeply into that in terms of, what are the specific factors considered, where do patients play a role in those decisions about what to do with devices when they malfunction. So that really opened my eyes, and I met a lot of people in industry as well who were involved in risk assessments. And so we did an effort with Amy to put together kind of a risk-benefit framework. It was a tremendous learning experience for me, and I saw how that was dealt with from the industry perspective in dealing with defective products. And then actually entering industry itself as a chief medical officer, having to deal with the entire product life cycle. Mm-hmm. And where do you insert patient perspectives into the design of the product, the marketing of the product, or when a product goes wrong, and then how do you continually improve the product to decrease the risk of it in the market? So,
that's really awesome. So one thing I noticed, which is interesting to me, is when you speak about risk, I heard you say benefit risk. I heard you say benefit risk together. So I was very curious to hear about your perspective, first as a physician surgeon. How, you mentioned you evaluate the risk of your decisions at the patient level by looking at the benefits. Why is it important for us to look at both?
Yeah, that's right. I know that your session is called Let's Talk Risk, and I'm introducing benefits, so I guess I'm sorry about that. But yeah, you have to really look at who is taking the risk, and that is where you need to get the information from and how they consider that balance. Mm-hmm. And so I told you a little earlier that I might go into an anecdote, and I will briefly, in the sense that when I was called by a physician to go see their patient because they needed an operation, the discussion I had with the patient was, here's the benefits of doing this procedure, and here are the risks. And of course, the risks include not doing the procedure. So, it was the patient who made that decision, and it's really fascinating to me how they did that calculation and made that decision. And so benefits a very, very important component of that.
Yeah. And certainly we talk about risk here. And the reason I mentioned this to you is because in general, my observation is we talk about risk a lot more than we talk about benefits. And in the latest revision of ISO 14971, I believe there's a little bit more emphasis on benefits for the first time. And that's one key message I want our audience to take away today. So what I heard you say, Adam, was that in your role as a physician or surgeon, you are acting as a facilitator of that decision, helping your patient make the decision at their level. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
So you are not really imposing your views, but you are presenting them a very balanced view of what the benefits are for them and what the risks might be for them. And that is where you had that conversation going.
Yes, and I think it's really important to keep that in the center of your thinking, because I saw physicians that didn't do that they made the decision from their perspective. In other words, this patient is at too high risk to have this procedure, and they would make the decision without actually engaging the patient. They would almost deny them the ability to participate. And I found that to be bizarre. That didn't make any sense to me. So yes, you really have to keep the patient at the center of it and let them voice their opinion about the balance.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let me now ask you the view of a regulator. You worked at the FDA, and again, you mentioned working on the benefit risk guidance. Now, they are not talking about an individual patient level conversation or a decision. They're talking as a whole, the target audience, the target patient population for their intended use. How does that factor into their conversations from a regulatory point of view?
Well, from a regulatory point of view, essentially, the agencies use proxies rather than use the actual patients. And there are many reasons for that, which, first of all, it's very difficult to speak to every single patient who might have a medical device used on them, for example. So you need to use a proxy of some kind. But the question is really, where in the life cycle are they gaining the appropriate information? The regulators look at things like, what kind of benefit, what's the likelihood of benefit for the population or for specific subpopulations. Then they look at the risk, similar kinds of questions. How severe is the risk? What's the likelihood of the risk or of the harm, I should say, and then how to mitigate it. But what I noticed when you go through the regulations and when you go through 14971 as well, is that these proxies are used over and over again, like the literature or medical device reports or things like that. And they don't actually say, go out and ask the patient or a patient advocacy group or some reasonable substitute for the patient. So it's missing.
Yeah. And, I want to share with you and with the audience results of 2 LinkedIn polls I did recently. I think that'll put things in perspective where the gaps are. So I first asked people who they thought were their primary customers. I actually asked about customers, but most people responded by saying they considered patients, which, patients are a very important stakeholders, nearly 80%. Then I asked a follow-up question. Okay, if that is so, how much time, what percentage of your time do you actually end up spending listening to your primary stakeholder? Guess what? More than 75% of the people said they spent less than 25% of their time. So you see, in the industry, we are practicing risk management, quality management. We are doing all this work, creating so much paper. And we are not even getting, probably in my view, the voice of the patient. So I wanted to ask you, with your experience in the industry, how do you bring that in? And how do you make sure that voice of the patient is appropriately heard during risk management?
That's the $64,000 question, because there have been several efforts to do that. And I said much earlier on that it's logistically quite difficult to get every single patient, obviously.
Mhm.
But, there have been some efforts. I mean, for example, the FDA has put in a patient advisory group, a patient engagement advisory group, things like that. But I think that the best way to do that is to figure out where along the product life cycle patient perspective is important. I mean, at the concept stage, at the clinical testing stage, during post-market experience, particularly if there are problems with the device, and then feeding back into future development of the device, like improvements, et cetera. And then setting up some kind of a standing engagement with patient groups that you can pull on, like advisors. I mean, there are scientific advisory boards at many companies, there are medical advisory boards, et cetera. But if you look at them, they don't contain patients. They have physicians, they have scientists, but they don't actually have the primary customer, as you pointed out, Naveen, right? They don't have the patient on them. So there's this big disconnect.
Yeah. And, another experience I'll share with you, my personal experience, I'm an engineer by training. So I do I've done product development. I know how it works. I have an engineering mind. And when I started doing risk management about 10 years ago, what I learned, I really didn't know anything about risk management until I started working with medical doctors, surgeons, physicians. And I was so fortunate to work with them for a period of 5 years. That is where I felt like we have this missing gap. So I know many companies cannot have full-time staff with clinical or medical expertise. For example, even medical safety officers, right? I don't think many companies have this role. Medical is that just my impression, or what is your observation about that?
Yeah, I agree. I haven't seen it that often. One of the things I did at FDA, just to kind of address that a little bit, when a device was being recalled and a company performed a health hazard evaluation, the first thing I did as a clinician, I looked at the authors of the health hazard evaluation document. And the first thing I looked for was a clinician. And many, many times there was no clinician. And I said, how can you determine the risk of the device? How can you determine the benefit risk assessment? Should this device stay on the market or not? That kind of question, if you had no clinician, at least some clinical perspective. And so, yeah, you're right. That position is missing in a lot of organizations.
So in that case, I'm curious now, Adam, if you came across that at your desk at FDA, how did you go about kind of responding to that?
Yeah, so it depended largely upon how much I agreed or disagreed with the company's assessment of the risk, because I looked at it through a clinical lens. And I mean, if I agreed, then there wasn't, much to discuss. But if I disagreed, well, I was on the phone with the company and I would say, we need a clinical perspective here.
Yep. So, I mean, what I'm hearing you say that, hey, we do all this risk management and analysis and assessments. We write risk management reports. In our documentation, if we don't see among the list of people somebody with clinical background or irrelevant clinical background, that should raise a red flag, right? Immediately.
Yes.
And at least
exactly, it's a red flag.
And we are not going to say that you have done it wrong, but we're going to be skeptical about your benefit risk evaluation, correct? And we're going to ask more questions.
Right, exactly.
Fascinating, guys. So I think this is a good setup for our conversation in the next 15, 20 minutes or so. And as you all know, if you have joined before, that this is the time I invite you to raise your hand virtually. And the way you will do that is find those 3 dots on your profile photo and request to speak. And I'll bring you on stage, and it takes a while. So, don't wait. If you are interested in having a conversation with Adam on this topic, sharing your insights, raise your hand and I'll bring all of you on stage. I can get quite a few people at one time. So don't be shy, don't hesitate, because that is the whole point. And getting Adam's insight from a clinician's point of view, from a regulatory point of view on risk management can be very, very useful to us. So Adam, I want to continue our conversation on this topic. So certainly we have a gap, right? So you just told me that you're going to be working in a pretty strategic role now in your new opportunity that you have. What would be your suggestions and advice on how to bridge this gap in the industry?
I think that as you go through the development of a device, through that life cycle I mentioned earlier, you have to ask at every step, who is taking the risk and how do I get their perspective? And so, if it's the very design of the device, then you have to say, okay, I'm building this device and it's going to be used in such a way on such a population of patients. Who is taking the risk? And something you pointed out a few minutes ago about the poll you took, Naveen, where you said 80% of people thought that their primary customer was a physician. There's actually, I see it a little bit differently. There's a disconnection there because the medical device industry doesn't sell devices to patients directly the vast majority of the time. Yes. They're selling them to the physician.
That's right.
And so the physician is making that surrogate decision for the patient, right? I'm going to use a certain heart valve or I'm going to use a certain pacemaker or whatever. I have never had a patient come to me and say, oh, I want company X's heart valve. Right? I've never had that happen.
Yes.
So I'm the one assessing the risk and benefit of all the different valves and so forth and so on. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You need to ask who is taking the risk and then how do I get them involved? So
that's a great insight. Absolutely. So I think what the takeaway message from me is that when you are doing your design and development, you're just starting out, we are supposed to do a design and development plan, right? We should ask this question. Who is the best source of information for us to learn about the risk? Who is the target audience and how we bring that information? Okay, great. So David, I know you have joined and I want to invite you to share what you have in mind.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, great. Dr. Saltman, thank you so much. I really appreciated your comments. My question is almost the flip side of the coin from Naveen's comment. Who at, say, a hypothetical large device manufacturer is the target audience to make a decision to make this a priority? Kind of a general, across the board to start making this more of a priority corporate-wide. So not necessarily the people who need to know the details, but the people who understand that this is an issue and need to make this a priority across the enterprise.
Not sure I understood you exactly, David. You mean what particular components of the design development plan? Or
actually, David, let me take a shot at that. I think what I'm hearing you say is that who among the decision makers in an organization, a large manufacturer of medical devices, for example, who among those decision makers should be thinking about this? Is that what I'm hearing you say, David?
Precisely. Thank you.
Oh, got it. Okay. No, thank you. Sorry, I was confused there for a second. Yeah, so that is a fascinating topic, actually, because when I became exposed to that, it was mostly in the post-market space when a device was non-conforming or violative, and we had to evaluate the risk. We would go back to the manufacturer's original risk assessments and look at like their FMEAs and things like that. And I mean, I've always been incredibly impressed by engineers and their ability to really, assess all the risks and things that could happen to the product and so forth. But that is where I would say, the stakeholder is not just the engineer. That's where they need to say, let me expose the potential users of the product, the people who are taking the risk to this, and make sure I've got my FMEA correct. So those stakeholders, but they don't need to be involved in manufacturing or things like that. So, I mean, the stakeholders come and go depending on where you are in this life cycle. I know I keep going back to that structure, like kind of construct, but I hope that kind of answers your question. And patients are not involved, right, in the initial risk assessment. So when the product is being designed.
Or Adam, I think what I have seen happen is that people make a lot of assumptions. They think that we know it, that they think we know the patient perspective. We have done it before. This is only an incremental product. We already have the voice of the patient. We know it. I think there's a lot of assumption that gets made. And that is where, David, I know you and I have talked before, and I have a good understanding of where you are coming from. I think you are asking the question more at the strategic level, at the executive level. Are they aware that we have these gaps in our processes? And
exactly.
what should they be doing about that? Right.
That's where the risk is.
That's where from an organization point of view, that's where the risk is, that in post-market, you come across an issue, an event, you write up your analysis, send it to the FDA, to someone like Adam, and they will begin to question your judgment because you don't have clinical expertise. Now what do you do? So fascinating, guys. Again, please, guys in the audience, I know there's a lot of you listening very intently. First of all, please share your how you're feeling. You can use the react button, thumbs up. There's no thumbs down, which is a good thing. I love it. And, do you like it? How is it going with you? Let us know what is on your mind. And don't hesitate to please raise your hand and come join this conversation. I really invite you to participate, get your questions answered, because most likely, I'm willing to bet that if you're working in the industry in a quality regulatory role or an engineering role, you don't really come across this opportunity to talk to a physician and a regulator at the same time. This is a unique perspective, and I really invite you to participate. So, David, I want to, since you are on stage, I'm going to, invite you to ask anything else that you have in mind or any other comment you want to share.
Well, so it might be interesting. I'm coming at this not only as a newbie to this industry, but I'm not a technical person either. So I'm not coming from an engineering or a design perspective. So my questions really are, as Naveen put, from a strategic point of view. But I think what I'm experiencing in my inability to find the right words to ask the question probably are the same things that are happening for a lot of executives in this industry. Maybe not exactly, but I believe there's a big gap between all the technical details, which amount to making decisions, and then the pressures put on the corporate level, which often results in short-time, profits. What we can see in the short term. And so there's not only a gap, but there's a dichotomy in what their incentives are. And I think that's kind of where my question lies. And
Gotcha.
This may not even be a question, but I'm just curious, Dr. Saltman, what your thoughts are as to provide good information to close that gap.
Yeah. So I was actually I'm thinking along the same lines you are now, David. And so I think that, I'm at the point in my career where I can be provocative, so I'm going to say some provocative things.
I love it.
The concept here is there are documents out there are guidelines out there, et cetera, that talk about, patient input into the risk process and their pre-market, post-market, their 14971, et cetera. And, no one is really doing that. So I encourage you to do that and to say, look, we have a benefit from a strategic point of view of doing this, because when regulators like FDA say, well, what's the patient's perspective? If you have done that exercise because you have considered them to be stakeholders and you've spoken to patients, patient advocates, et cetera, and gotten their opinion and documented it, you are way ahead of the curve, because no one else really has that. And it's all in the dark right now. So it's to your advantage strategically to do that. And then when you make your application, you have the patient perspective. When there's a problem with the device, you have the patient perspective. Mm-hmm. So get ahead of that curve and get that perspective as part of your routine. So it has a strategic and a business advantage to do that, rather than try to recover when you don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Andy, you have joined here, so I'm going to invite you to share what you have in mind. Please unmute your mic.
Oh, hi, you guys. I really enjoyed your talk today. And I wanted to just ask you from an anesthesiologist perspective, I've been recently kind of diving a little more deeply into the regulatory guidelines, such as 14971 and 13485, and taking Naveen's course, that type of thing. And I was wondering if you might offer any suggestions on how someone with new experience might go with a top-down type of approach.
Andy, just to clarify your question, and again, I have a little bit of, I know you a little bit better from our past conversation. You have experience as an anesthesiologist. Did I say it right?
That's correct.
Anesthesiologist. So you have seen the operating theater, you are aware of it, and now you are thinking about maybe exploring some career opportunities in a little bit more sort of quality regulatory or kind of a safety related world, right? And I think that could be a perspective to ask this question to Adam because he has seen both worlds.
That's right. Yeah. You had talked a little bit about top-down approach from the clinical perspective, and then, from the engineering perspective, going a bottom-up type of approach. And so I was just wondering how, if there's some perspective that you might give on the opportunity to do a top-down approach.
Got you. Adam, would you be willing to share some thoughts on that? How to do it right from both, medical point of view and also from an engineering point of view?
Yeah, I think that as you mentioned at the very beginning, Andy, you're going through these documents, you're going through the guidelines, the FDA guidelines for pre-market benefit risk assessments and so forth. I think if you dig into those documents and stay fairly close to the factors they mention, that'll be a pretty good approach for you. That'll be a pretty good answer to your question. And so you'll see there where we talk about things like the FDA, where we talk about things like, what is the type of benefit or the probability of benefit or the duration, and then balance that against the same factors, but for risk. That's where you can start to, I think, take that sort of top-down approach, because that's the way you really need to think of every medical device. So from the very beginning. So was that helpful at all?
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
And I will add to that comment, Andy, is that if you look at FDA's guidances, they provide examples to you. And that's the greatest thing they have done. Because when you write it up, give a template, it's difficult to understand, but read their examples and how they would analyze benefit risk in a certain situation. They've actually told you. So I strongly recommend that you review those guidance documents and try to absorb them as much as possible and apply them. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you.
With that, Roger, welcome. Please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Hi, this is kind of a comment maybe toward some of the things David was talking about. I was lucky enough when I worked at a big company, our representative of the patient came through the clinical team at that large company. And I think we called them clinical engineers, but I know there were staff people on there that help organize clinical trials. So whether they're clinical engineers, clinical staff, clinical team, I'm not sure what they are. But I've noticed in tracking them, it's been many years now, through LinkedIn, I see a lot of them are operating as independent consultants. So thinking about those out there that want to get access or wondering where they can find a patient advocate or someone with that knowledge, I just want to throw that out there. You might actually look on LinkedIn for clinical consultants. I can't think of what they call themselves on there, but I know they're out there. So I just wanted to offer that up for David and anyone else.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. And I think this is the benefit of conversations like these, right? It also offers us an opportunity to network and connect with other people in the industry. And I really encourage you guys to reach out to anybody in this audience. Maybe you made good connections. Maybe you find people who can help you. There is so much out there. We just need to be a little bit open. Thank you, Roger. Glenn, welcome. And I want to invite you to share what you have in mind.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for the talk. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So I'm a UX and product designer, and I've worked at medical device companies before. And I just wanted to put a comment out there. One of the ways that you can actually get some upfront answers to things, even if the device is still in its infancy and not usable yet, you can prototype things out. You can make clickable mock-ups and walk clinicians and patients through that experience to get some quick and easy answers up front that can sort of help shape the journey of the device. So just wanted to offer that as a tool in the beginning stages. I'm happy to.
So what you are saying, Glenn, is that make that part of your design and development process. As engineers, we make prototypes mostly to test kind of performance requirements and this test and that test. But what you're saying is that also test how the clinicians and users or patients might actually experience our device. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Even a very low fidelity walkthrough can yield quite a bit of information that's very helpful up front. And
so I think I'm going to take that as a best practice for design and development plans. Thank you for sharing that with us. Guys, so I think we are at the end of our 30 minutes. This has been a fascinating conversation. So in a minute, I'm going to invite Adam for some closing comments. But I want to share with you a few notes of housekeeping. First of all, those of you who are new to these conversations, we meet every Friday at 11 Eastern. If you like these, put them on your calendar so that you will know. And I make an announcement a week before about the guest and the topic. So you could do that. And if you miss any one of these conversations, I will produce a recording in an article with key highlights of our conversation in my Let's Talk Risk newsletter. You can find the link to that newsletter in a comment on this event announcement, and you can sign up to receive an alert whenever I publish a recording. And the third thing I want to share with you is I know many of you, actually all of you in the audience, have a unique perspective, unique experiences, unique insights, and knowledge. I invite you to contact me if you are interested in being a guest speaker. So the floor is open. Please reach out to me through LinkedIn and share your interest. We will chat and figure out how best to focus our conversation in a future discussion. With that, thanks everybody. And Adam, please, if you would be kind to just share a few closing comments for us.
Yeah, thank you, Naveen. I think that I just want to come back to thinking about your device and during the life cycle of the device, who is taking the risk? How do I get their input? And then, be provocative about it. Go ahead and, ask to engage. And that's how you will have the safest devices with the best adoption.
Perfect. And all of us can take that initiative, right? We don't have to be so high up in the organization to make those decisions. We can be empowered. We can take that decision. Great. With that, guys, thank you again for joining and participating in this conversation. Glenn, Roger, David, thanks for sharing your thoughts and insights. And Adam, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your insights with us. I wish you all the best in your new assignment and look forward to staying in touch with you. Guys, with that, have a good weekend, and we're going to connect next week once again. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.